Engaging our learners in reading is really challenging, and sometimes we really don't know where to start. I mean, it's not math where you can have a game or an activity that kids are constantly playing in order for you to see if they understand what you're teaching them. Reading isn't like that. Every day we have our students come in, they read, they write, and then they leave. So how can we make reading instruction fun for our kids? In this video, guys, I'm going to be sharing 5 different activities that will help increase the engagement of your class, but also the rigor. Let's do it. So these 5 activities are going to be huge time savers for you because you can utilize them with any text and you don't need to have a ton of different materials. The thing that I'm going to say that you probably need the most just to kind of make it a little bit more vibrant and fun is just colored paper, which I like to use cardstock because it tends to be something that I can keep year after year and the kids don't typically crinkle it up. So that's all you need for any of these activities. And like I said, you can use them for any book, reading, informational, research. There are so many different possibilities here. And so what I typically will do is just interchange them as I go throughout the year. Okay, so let's jump into our very first activity. So this activity is one that I call Heads Up. It's very similar to the activity that you have on your phone. It's a great game to play with kids. I like to use this activity for comprehension, especially that literal comprehension understanding, but I also use it for grammar and vocabulary. Now, this is a very simple activity for you to be able to make. Even if you did not want to make this in PowerPoint or through Word, you could very easily just take index cards, cut them in half, and then just hand write it right up at the top. That way, you're saving yourself some time from having to print and cut and even laminate if you choose to laminate. I chose to not laminate these, and I've had them for 4 years and they work fantastic. So this is for a text that we did for Edward Tulane. It was a really great book to be able to use this for. So what I did is I went through the text and I located different names, different objects, places that I felt like I really wanted the students to be able to know because there was a lot of different movement that was happening in that book. And so what the kids would do is I ended up pairing them up and I gave them a deck of cards like this. And I also made sure that in that deck of cards, I chose to use a variety of different colors. That way that the cards didn't end up getting mixed up. It was just a really great organizational strategy. So if I had one that was left on the floor, I knew exactly which pile it belonged to. And so I gave them their deck of cards and then I also gave them a little headband, which I purchased at the Dollar Tree. Now, I will tell you guys that the kids didn't really enjoy using the headbands, mainly because they struggled really bad with getting it to come off. So a lot of the times the kids would instead just hold it up on top and they would just kind of pull them down as they were able to answer them. So that's kind of the basic of the setup there. And then once I had them paired up, they were ready to go. I put a timer on the clock and I did only 2 minutes on that timer. It was a really intense game and the kids were like super stressed out. But all they had to do is their partner had to be able to tell them, you know, the place where such and such placed Edward every single day. And then they had to say, oh, the high chair. So they had to be able to understand. They were giving them hints and clues about what was it that was up here on the very top of their card. And when they guessed what it was right, they said yes. And they would place it on one pile. When they got something wrong, they were like, skip. And so they would place it in a separate pile and this would go on and on and on. So it was a great way to be able to engage them. They love this game. Like I said, it works great for the literal comprehension and it also works really well for grammar and vocabulary. So that is the first game of Heads Up. The second activity that I'm going to share with you is not necessarily a game, but it's something that allows for collaboration, which I don't know about y'all, but my kids love to talk. So this is a great way for me to be able to get them engaged and talking and collaborating with someone at their group. Now, I do this as a small group activity, which makes it really nice and simple for me to be able to manage. And this one is laminated. I chose to laminate this and I use it year after year, like I said, it works out great. But what I did is I took one of my graphic organizers. In this case, for fourth grade, we teach plot, which plot is really, really difficult to understand in fourth grade. And so one of the different things that I wanted to do was I wanted them to understand, one, do you understand all the different elements of plot? Can you be able to tell me and show me on your plot map which ones they are and match them to their definitions? And then two, I wanted them to be able to place these with different stories, place the events on a plot map properly. Now, if you look at Webb's depth of knowledge, when we're looking at all of the different levels, this is going to be a level 2 or 3. Now, it's nice because I allow my students, once they're able to start kind of sorting and classifying and placing things in different areas, once they're able to start doing that, it's a way for me to be able to scaffold my instruction. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But let's talk about how to set up the activity. So the first thing I would do is just take a graphic organizer. Any graphic organizer, you can place boxes in that graphic organizer. I used PowerPoint to be able to create this. It was pretty simple for the most part. And all I did was on the very back, just to be able to maintain my materials for this, is I had a little Ziploc bag. Now the trick is on that little Ziploc bag, you'll want to have it open and then staple so that the Ziploc bag is placed and stuck onto the actual organizer. And once you have that, you can place all of your cards on the inside. So in this case, I had for my group, I wanted them to identify the different elements of plot. So here you're going to kind of see that they have a smaller block and then they have a bigger block. Well, they had to be able to say, oh, well, this is the exposition here. And then they had to find the definition of the exposition and place it right underneath it. So this was a nice way for me to be able to see, do you understand the elements of plot first? Because if you don't have that understanding, it's going to be really, really difficult for you to then identify those elements within a text. So that was one thing that I started doing in fourth grade, and it was a great activity because it gets the conversation going. I also recommend that if you don't necessarily, and you want to kind of just double check as you go along throughout the year that they still are retaining the understanding of the elements of plot. This is a great introduction like activity that the kids can do. You have it placed out around your small group area, and as they sit down or they're coming and everybody's transitioning to their different areas, kids will automatically get started on this at your small group area while you're touching base with everyone else to ensure that they are on task and working before you get your group going. So it's a great way to get kids to check their knowledge. So this is one way. Now I'm going to continue kind of with this exact same board, but I'm going to talk about how I take it to the next level. So one of my stories that I absolutely love is The Mystery in the Backyard. Oh, this is such a great book to teach plot for fourth grade. Actually, it's a short story. It's an anthology. So it's a great short text to teach plot for fourth grade because it has all of those different elements. And so after we read this in small group and we're engaging and we're talking about it, and I'm just going to let you guys know that the kids are looking for looking at their neighbor because they think that he murdered his mom. I know, anytime you bring in that, the kids automatically, I think, get engaged and excited about a text. So what I did was after we read that book to kind of scaffold them, because I didn't expect them to automatically be able to start pulling out those elements of plot. Like I said, it's a really, really difficult skill for kids. What I did is I went on ahead and created all of the little blocks that fit within this graphic organizer. So then kids would have to then place all of the different pieces on their graphic organizer. Again, it's another great way to create engagement, collaboration, because I would pair them up with another person at that group. They would have to read them together and then be able to classify them. Now, as they were doing that, I'm constantly asking, well, why do you think that this is the exposition? Why do you think that this is the rising action? I want them to be able to support their thinking, which is really going to benefit them as they go into 5th and 6th grade. So this is all of the little pieces to this story, and the kids love this activity. It's something out of the normal. It's something that's a little bit more engaging and exciting. and it allows for them to just talk with their friends and to process their thinking further. So this is the second activity, which we're going to call using graphic organizers for sorting. Okay, so let's go into the third activity. Now, in this activity, I like to be able to use this again for collaboration when it comes to talking with their peers at their table, or if you choose to do this as an entire whole group class, you can put them into groups of 3s. But it does allow for conversation. It allows for them to analyze, to classify, and if I'm looking at the Webb's depth of knowledge, this is going to be a level 3, which is a really high level because I end up having them revise, and then I also end up having them reclassify or analyze. There are all of these different ways that you can utilize this strategy, and it's a super, super simple one to do. So I have 2 different ways that I use this one, and I only have one of the examples, but once you kind of see this, you'll understand it. So here's what I do. Once I take a story, we've gone over plot, and I want to start teaching how to summarize a text, which again is another really difficult skill to use in 4th grade. Once I have them starting to think about what a summary is, we go over like what are all of the different parts that we need to have in our summary. Then I want to, right before I have them jump in to write their summary, I want them to be able to see a variety of different types of summaries. I want us to be able to have a conversation about what makes a really good summary, and then how can we take this type of a summary and make it even better? That's the revision stage there. So what I do is I took my story. This is again from The Mystery in the Backyard. I took a story and I wrote one really good summary. The summary that I feel like I really want my students to be able to write for me. And then I take common mistakes that students typically will do. I have one where they give way too much information, and it's the and then. And then I have another one where they start to use dialogue, which is a huge no-no for us. So I have them with their partners after we've talked about what makes a really good summary. What are those pieces that I really want to have in there? I give them these 3 little sheets of paper, and I printed them all on different colors. Each group has the same colored for whichever it is, so that way it's easier for us to be able to identify them and go over them and talk about them together as a group. But what I do is once we have that piece, then the kids will then have to read it with their partners. And then they have to classify and justify which one is going to be the absolute best. And once we have that conversation together as a group about which one we feel is the best, then I send them out with their partners, and then they have to completely revise the other 2. What are the parts that you're going to end up taking out? What are those pieces that you would revise in those other 2 to be able to make it better? Now, they don't have the one that's the perfect example with them when they're doing this. So I would send them with the other 2 and say, now I want you guys to go back and I want you to revise it. Tell me what are the pieces that need to come out of it. Tell me what would you add to it to be able to make it the best. So this is one activity, and I do this with summaries. But the other way that I like to use this activity is to also have my kids be able to provide evidence to support their thinking. So anytime that I have my kids tell me, what are the character traits that you are identifying with this character? Or, what is the character change, and what is it that allowed for that character to change? Again, it's such a hard skill for them to be able to talk about it in a group and then automatically be able to go out and write it, that these types of activities will properly scaffold that instruction. So once I have them we're talking about it, the next day I might have them come back, and I might have different things that that we had talked about what is it that we were identifying in that text, what were we noticing in that text. But then they had different pieces of evidence, and with their partners, they had to be able to classify that evidence and say, well, this evidence best supports this. Because what we talk about in reading instruction is that evidence, there's so many different pieces of evidence. If I was to think of myself as a lawyer and I was in a crime case and I needed to be able to find the best evidence to say, you know what, this person is innocent, or this person is guilty, and here are my best pieces of evidence. I'm not going to throw everything at them. I'm going to throw at them my best pieces of evidence. So we have to be able to properly classify and identify what are those best pieces of evidence. So the kids will automatically start to organize themselves and say, well, these are going to be the best ones that fit it. These are not so good. And then these are right there down the middle, where if I feel like I don't have enough really, really good pieces of evidence, here's some that I can pull from to help support my thinking. Okay guys, so this next one is a little bit of a doozy and might be a little bit complicated. So stick with me, I'm gonna try to go a little bit slow. This activity is called numbered heads. And for this activity, what you have to do, and it's a great comprehension activity, it can be either inferencing questions, it can be literal questions. So I think this is a really nice activity that kind of hits all of the questions that you want to hit to make sure that kids are really understanding and having a conversation about what is happening within the text. So you have to have 2 different colored cards. I, again, made these in PowerPoint because I feel like using a table in PowerPoint is just so flippin' easy. But you can very easily, they don't have to be fancy, you can use colored index cards and it would work just as great. So you have to have 2 different types of cards. Let's talk about the first type of card that you have to have. So in this group activity, you could do it in, it has to be in a group of 4. Because you're going to have 4 different jobs to give kids, okay? So you're going to do this in a group of 4. And what you do is each number represents a job that that person is going to have. So for instance, number 1, the person who has the number 1 card is going to read the question. The person who has the number 2 card is going to be the person who gives a short answer to support and be able to support that question with evidence, okay? So they give the answer and the evidence. Person number 3 states whether they agree because or whether they disagree with number 2 because of, and they have to give their reasonings. And person number 4 is responsible for summarizing the question, the answer, and the evidence. So these are 4 different jobs. Now, if you wanted to condense them to be able to do a group of 3, I think you could very easily be able to do that. You can get rid of the number 3 card, or you can have the number 1 read and answer, then have the number 3 as your 2, and then this one here as your 3, if that makes sense. So you can condense them any way that you wanted to. But I think it's really nice to be able to give them their job. So this is why it's called numbered heads. So whatever you are, this is what you're going to end up doing. So once you have given them their jobs, you then give them questions from the text. So this was a story that I did on the missing grocery money. And I had a variety of different questions that I had the kids be able to answer. So what they would do is they would place this face down on there, like as a pile of deck of cards, and then the number 1 would pull it, they would read it, number 2 would then answer it with evidence, number 3 would agree or disagree, and number 4 would summarize the whole situation. But number 1 doesn't get to get off that easy because they're like, oh, I have to just read their question every time. That's super easy. No, no, no. What ends up happening is you can either say clockwise, counterclockwise, whatever works best for you, but they have to then switch their heads. So number 1 might be number 4 this time, and so on and so forth. So they're constantly switching the roles of what they're supposed to do. And then they would pull the activity again, and they would do the activity. And it just keeps going around until all of the questions have been answered. Again, it's a really great way to increase the engagement, increase the rigor, because there's so many different pieces that are kind of going into play here. But it allows for kids to just have conversation and to hear what others are thinking. And that's a really important skill to be able to have in your classroom. So again, like I said, you don't have to have these really fancy cards. You don't have to make it on PowerPoint if you don't want to do that. Just go through, find some colored cardstock, cut it up, and go ahead and just write it in. It doesn't need to be fancy, because where the fancy and the awesome part comes into play are the conversations and the engagement that's happening with your students, not necessarily the font that you're using at the end of the day. So this activity, again, is called Numbered Heads. I store them in little Ziploc bags and I kind of keep them all together. Makes it for easy storing, and then I pull them out when I'm ready for it. So that's Numbered Heads. The last activity that I like to do with my kids is one that is a little bit different. I like to use this with understanding the parts of speech, understanding different types of sentences, any type of vocabulary that you're using in your class, but I also like to teach it for using the terminology that I'm using as I'm teaching reading. So if I'm talking about schema or rising action or external conflict, I want my students to understand what all of those different pieces mean. So there are a couple of different ways that you can use this, and here's the way that I like to do it. So I go to Quizlet.com because it is super easy for me. I actually found these cards, which are all about the elements of plot and the parts of story, that it just made it easy for me to be able to print because somebody already had all that work done for me. And so what I did is I just printed it out on colored cardstock, like you can see here. I cut it out, I glue it together. I didn't even laminate it just because I have starting to get more and more away from laminating because I've just gotten lazy over the years. So what I do is I end up taking these cards and I will create a huge deck of them that I will use inside of my classroom. So like I have like about 6 different sets of just the elements of plot and understanding characters and conflict, suspense, mood, tone, all of those different pieces. And what I will do is before my kids come to my table, once I'm ready to start getting ready for groups, I will leave them on the table and I will have different spots for them. So wherever the kids sit, I will place them there and they automatically know that they're going to get with a partner and they're going to quiz themselves. They're going to go through and quiz and try to utilize it either in a sentence or they're going to talk about it and explain it. However they choose to be able to show that they understand what it means, that's kind of what they're doing. So it's a very easy way for me to say, okay, you have something to do when you come to my small group area while I'm making sure that everybody else is working and on task. So that's what they're doing here. It's a very simple way for them to go through and just to make sure that they understand it. I don't use a lot of anchor charts. I don't leave them up all year round because this is a really good way for me to ensure that they're continuously practicing and understanding what it is that we're talking about and the terminology that we're using in class. So like I said, you can use this for how I use it, where I just leave it on the small group table and they quiz themselves as they come around. And then I'm getting ready for any groups or activities that we're doing in our group. So like I said, I use these as something where I can just leave it on the table. The kids have something to do so that they're not getting off track, or they have something that is purposeful and meaningful that they're going to use when they come to my group, while I'm ensuring that everyone else is good and they're on task and working. Another really great strategy to have in your toolbox so that you can make sure that every minute that you're using in your class is meaningful. Or you can use this activity as a quiz train. So this is something that Jen Jones has talked a ton about. And it is a very, very fun activity. But you can utilize it as a whole group activity where you would pass out all of the cards. I like to put Taylor Swift on because she's my favorite. And so I will put the music on, the kids will walk around, and then as soon as I stop, they have to pair up. They quiz each other on the words, but then they trade cards. And so when they trade cards, they have a new one that they have to quiz somebody on and tell them what the meaning of it. And so that goes on until it's just time for us to kind of get back on track. But it's a great way for the kids to have something fun and engaging. And it's also making sure that they understand all of the different terminology that we're using in class. So that one is our vocabulary and our quiz trait. So that is it, guys. Those are the 5 activities that I utilize inside of my classrooms to help increase the engagement, but also the rigor of my students. So I hope that you guys enjoyed these 5 activities. They're incredibly simple to make. I store them with my text year after year that I can use them, and it is a really easy way to use across many different levels of texts all year long. So if you end up wanting to use one of these activities, I would love to see it on Instagram. Share it, tag me inside of it so that I can see how this is working out for you and for your students. And I so appreciate you guys for watching this video. Please make sure to give the video a thumbs up. And if you are new here, hello. Welcome. My name is Bridget Spackman. I am a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade multi-age teacher in Central Pennsylvania. I'm also the content creator of The Lettered Classroom, which is where you are right now. And I enjoy talking everything literacy, productivity, and the personalization of learning for our students. So hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed, and the little bell for the notifications every time I upload a video or I go live, which is on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And I so appreciate you for coming and hanging out and watching this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all next time.